Hi, my name is Erica, and welcome to my second book of 2016. I am recording my books one at a time this year rather than in weekly or monthly wrap-ups, just to do something different because it's fun, so why not? So, the second book that I read this year was this giant, massive thing here. This is The Hour I First Believed by Wally. So, just to start, as a disclaimer, I think almost anything I say in this video is going to be spoilery, to a point, except for the fact that, like, the synopsis itself talks about some of the stuff that's in it, but I don't even know if I can talk about the book without spoiling part of it. So just right now, if you don't want any spoilers for the book, then don't even. Just like the video because, you want to read the book and go get the book. This book is a massive undertaking. It's 730 pages long. I started reading it in December, and due to its super heavy topics, I actually put it down for the last couple weeks of the month so that I could read something holiday related, and read a couple smaller Christmas stories, and then read just a little collection of holiday stories. And then I finished A Darker Shade of Magic, which there's a video for already, if you want to check that out. And then I picked this one back up to finish it. This is a book that was lent to me by a friend of mine a year ago. In January of 2015, I went to her house just to hang out for a little bit, and I made a cake for her son's birthday. And she handed me a bag full of books, and I am still working through the books. So anyway, I just have to pick it up. I love Wally Lamb. I say this in being that I've only read one of his books. However, it was so poignant and so well written that I just love him. I think he has amazing writing style. The book that I had read before was She's Come Undone, which I think is his debut novel. And it's a beautiful, amazing story. If you have not read that story, get a box of tissues and then get that book and sit down and I devoured that book in maybe a week, and it was a huge book, and I was young. But anyway, emotional roller coaster doesn't even begin to express how emotional this book is. It is so heavy. It is such an undertaking. It's such a massive and epic read. Not just because it's a long book, but because of how many things happen in the book. If you have any trigger areas, it's probably in here. Every single thing that could possibly be a trigger is part of this book. Its main thing, the main character in the book, his name is Caleb, which I think is the coolest name, by the way. I've never heard the name Caleb, but his name is Caleb, and he is married to Maureen. Their last name is Quirk. Quirk is a big thing in this. That name is big in this book. So they're married. They live in Littleton, Colorado. They live in Littleton, Colorado in the late 90s. Do you know where I'm going with this? So this book starts out with a teacher who works at Columbine High School in Littleton, Colorado, and a nurse who works in Littleton, Colorado. And it starts on that. It starts kind of with where they're at in their marriage. There's already been a lot of tumultuous things happening in their marriage. There was infidelity. There was also a massive, there's already been prison involved because with the result of infidelity. Again, spoilery discussion because I don't know how to talk about the book without it. With the infidelity came a massive rage, which turned into assault. The husband went after the man that was sleeping with his wife and ended up in jail, and so on and so forth, and anger management and things and whatever. It talks a lot about drinking and stuff right in the beginning of it, and alcoholism, because that runs in Caleb's family. His father actually was an alcoholic and died due to his alcoholism, not because of complications of alcoholism, but because he fell asleep on a railroad track. Yeah, he had his legs cut off. See, already the book has already had things, and this is probably in the first 25 pages of the book, no joke. So the story takes place there. They're in Colorado. They've moved to Colorado after the infidelity to try to kind of start their life over, and they're at Columbine. They're at Columbine in 1999. They're there when Columbine's massacre happens. For me, reading it, when I realized I had read in the synopsis, because the synopsis talks about Columbine and how it affected their lives, and I already was kind of like, oh, this is going to be weird. I was 16 when Columbine happened. I was in high school when Columbine happened. And I remember all of the reports. I remember all the stuff on the TV. I remember candlelight vigils. I remember being very affected by it. I remember it changing my high school experience because suddenly we had a cop on duty, and there were other schools that were doing like metal detectors, and there were like a million bomb threats, and people thought it would be funny to write like death lists. I mean, like, it was horrible, some of the stuff that happened. Obviously, Columbine in itself was a horrible tragedy. Anyway, and it was the first of many that were publicized of school shootings and mass shootings like that, and obviously they still happen now, unfortunately. But that being kind of the jumping off point for the book, weird in its own right. Again, this is a work of fiction. However, it uses, oh my god, at least 50 references that are historical, that are accurately historical, meaning like the Columbine things are in it, again, because I lived through that. I remember that happening. The things that it explained, like some of the names that are in there, I remember those names because I remember reading the stories about them. I remember reading the books that came out by people that had survived Columbine, and some of them are in here as like little snippet characters because your main character and his wife both work in Columbine. What happens here is this interesting divide between the two spouses. When Columbine happens, meaning the actual shooting happens, Caleb actually knows the two boys are in some of his classes. He knows them personally. He's seen them outside of school even. And they've always kind of struck him as a little odd, but nothing really to worry about. And he's one of the teachers that had, as his story unfolds, he's the teacher that had read some of their stuff, and people had been like, oh, I should be really concerned. And he was like, whatever, like, people just have really good imaginations, that kind of stuff. So he feels a certain amount of guilt because of that. Additionally, he is not there when it happens. His aunt, who raised him, falls ill, and he flies back to his hometown of Three Rivers, Connecticut, which is a big giant part of the story as well as Three Rivers, Connecticut. So he goes back to the farm to see his aunt. Her name is Wally, and he's there when this happens. So he's not with his wife when the Columbine tragedy happened. When it does happen, she has taken a liking to a student who has basically adopted her as her mother. Her name is Velvet. She's also a very big character in the story. She's really annoying and very much your angsty teenager. I never really liked Velvet. However, I didn't dislike her either. I kind of understood her. I was also an angsty teenager. But she's very angsty, very... it's just, you can tell that she's come from more of like a, I guess like a broken home kind of situation, where she doesn't really have anybody taking care of her. She has to do everything by herself. And she really takes to Maureen as her mother, and eventually to Caleb as well. Like they have a kind of interesting relationship, and I really, really, really like the development of their relationship later in the book, after 1,000 things happen. So we've started with this whole thing in Columbine. It turns in this, like, Maureen is actually in the library during Columbine, which, if anybody remembers Columbine, the library was a scene of really horrific things, and anybody that was there, for the most part, most of the people that were in the library were either injured or perished. In this novel, in this case, there are I think 3 characters altogether that make it out of the library, and it kind of goes on for their things, and of those characters, Maureen and Velvet are both people that were there. So from there, so we've already got Columbine, which is tragic. We've already got infidelity. We've already got assault and going to jail, and now we have them being separated, and then him really rushing back to be at his wife's side, and what happens, and then it's the loss of his wife in a different way. Though she is alive and she's there, she develops PTSD really severely, which I don't know if there's any form of PTSD that isn't severe, to be completely honest, but I will say this novel, and I've said it since I started, really got like halfway through the book, I feel like it gives a voice to PTSD that I've never heard of before. I have never, and I've felt like I understood PTSD as much as I do now that I've read this novel, which I would really love it if somebody with PTSD read the novel and told me if it's right. The friend of mine who actually lent this to me does have PTSD, and when I was explaining I was kind of asking her, I was like, so is PTSD basically this? And I said, is it like severe anxiety with like panic inducing attacks essentially, and like immobilizing? Is that what this is? And she was like, yeah, it's like, you know, flashbacks, and all of a sudden you're back in the same place, and then you don't really know how to function anymore. Like you've lost that part of you. And I have two friends that both suffer from PTSD, but I never, other than knowing it's a form of anxiety that's really like heightened, I didn't really understand anything else about it. But after like reading this and kind of talking with them about it, I feel like I have a different understanding. I feel like it gives a voice and a character to it in a way that not just one character in this has PTSD. There's actually two in particular that have PTSD, and both of them, the way that it's described, one is the extreme of being really angry, not really how to deal with things, not wanting to talk about it, not wanting to actually diagnose themselves as having PTSD, that kind of thing. And the other one, which is Maureen, goes through like the entire motions, meaning like she's really depressed, sometimes she's immobilized, sometimes she can't leave her house. There's an entire like 6-month period where she really can't do anything. And on top of it, other things like unfold from there, and crazy pants, oh my god. But I do feel like the way that it's, I feel like Wally Lamb is one of the most honest authors I have ever read anyway, because he shares like the darker parts of things without just sharing like the clinical things, you know, that maybe you've heard before, but he shows like the rest of it. There is, what else happens in this? My god. So after Columbine and that thing, they end up moving on to Three Rivers in Connecticut because his aunt has passed away and he's taking on the farm. This is like, I'm telling you, like, this is, I don't even know how much more the books go into. So they go to the farm, they do the thing, right? Every single thing that happens when they are in Three Rivers, to me, is fascinating. The fact that you see Maureen going through more of her PTSD and then coming out of like the PTSD things and trying to live her life again. You see Caleb trying to make his own life and doing things there. The fact that they're both trying to like pack up this house and do things and that kind of stuff is interesting. They've moved away from Littleton because they just can't really be there anymore. It's too much for her. When they make the decision to move to, I'm missing like a lot of things. I've like skipped over a lot of stuff, but I'm trying not to give the whole book anyway. When they've gone there and stuff, there's all these things that have happened that are kind of nuts. There's a lot of therapy related things happening. There's also addiction happening, where the character of Maureen is going through her own addiction. At this point in the novel too, Caleb is still like, you can tell when you read the parts of it, because Caleb is your main narrator. This is the person that's telling you the story for the most part. It's told through his eyes, and on the times where he's drinking and he's really like giving into that, you can, as the reader, feel like you're an alcoholic, like you're not controlling yourself, like this is a problem. But there's a lot of the book where he really doesn't identify that way, where he just identifies as he has a couple of drinks more than he should, but he's not as bad as his dad, and he kind of keeps saying things like that. Oh my god, there are so many characters in this book, I don't even know where to go. It was such a good read. It was massive. It was emotional. I found myself like in tears a lot. I found myself angry a lot. I found myself just, I mean, like really depressed. It really triggers like a little bit of a depression, to be completely honest. Like there were points in it where I was like, oh, I don't even know. Because not only is Columbine in here, 9/11 is also in here, and Katrina is in here. In fact, there are characters in this that suffer through Hurricane Katrina, where they lose everything and they have to leave, and they end up in Three Rivers, and they end up at the farm with Caleb. There's also an entire storyline that has to do with a boy who hides his true identity. He's gay and he doesn't tell his family, and because he isn't telling his family, he cuts himself, which for me, I was just like, oh no. And for me, it's a little different because I am somebody that cut myself at one point in my life. I did spend 10 years of my life not knowing how to cope with things, and that being my coping method. And I'm not somebody that's, ever had to deal with, my sexual orientation, having, like that kind of thing. Like that's not something for me. I've never had to deal with stuff like that, but I do understand the feeling that in order to deal with something, you have to release in a way, and using something like self-mutilation and or cutting, whichever way you want to put it, as that. Like, so that, like, part of that character, I was just like, whoa, okay, which I think is what triggered me having to kind of step back for a minute, because I was just like, this is getting, like, this is too much. We've already got a person addicted, now we've got a person who's and we have, somebody else is really trying to deal with the addiction and the losing his wife and all this stuff and all the craziness that's happening, and he's like losing it in his own right, and the PTSD, and then the residual kind of PTSD of not being there, and the guilt that's there, and then we've already had like an assault, a thing, and a stuff, and then at this point we've got a kid who's losing it, basically. Like he's this whole little character over here, which this is a very small character, and when this part came of the book, I actually found myself being like, what is happening? If you follow me on Goodreads, you have seen my progress reading this book, and the whole time I kept having moments where I'd be like, well, what is happening? Where are we going now? Where are we going? What's this? Because every page in this book, every chapter, and the chapters are fairly long, they're like 40 and 50, 60, 70, 80, 100 pages even, some of them. Each chapter really like just throws you into another tailspin, because you figure you have your whole Columbine, you have your 9/11, because he's progressing through the years also, because these happened obviously in different, 99 is when Columbine happened, 2000, obviously 9/11 happened in 2001, and then Katrina happened in 2004, if I remember right. Might be wrong on that. I meant 2005. Anyway, it happened down the line there. So it's kind of progressing with the years because of that. When your characters from Katrina come in, at that point, it's super, super spoilery because I have to. At that point, Caelan's by himself in this big farmhouse, and his aunt has died. She's the only person he feels like ever loved him or was honest with him. He's got all this crap in his house that's like old things from, his grandmother and his aunt and his great-grandmother, where they like saved all this stuff about the family, and he just can't get rid of it, and he tries to get a historian to take it, and nobody wants to take it. He may lose his house because his wife, who was addicted to narcotics, she was stealing them from the place she was working, because she finally got a job again as a nurse. And because she was stealing them, she got in a car and she drove, and she ended up killing somebody with her car. So the family is trying to sue them and take the farm away, essentially. And so there's a big civil suit happening there. She is in jail, and the jail happens to be right on their property. Now, why is the jail on their property? Because that aunt we talked about earlier, Aunt Wally, there's a huge thing in this about how he grew up on this lake and stuff, and his aunt worked at the prison. The prison was founded by his ancestors. So you have this entire part of the story where you keep learning about the prison and the things that happen in the prison and stuff like that, and because you're learning about stuff like that, this prison in particular is a women's prison, and or women's correctional institute, I think is what they actually call it, but it's a prison. The whole thing with that, which is really fascinating, is that the book goes into this whole thing where it's telling you about women's rights and about why they decided to make a separate prison, because they didn't have it before, and they basically just threw women into the prison with the men as like lost women, didn't really care what happened to them. The lighting is not as good now. It was much better in the daylight, but now it's dark out. So when we get to the point where they're so alone, where Maureen is in prison and Caleb is by himself at the farmhouse that he grew up in. He grew up there. And we start learning a lot more about Caleb's past. Specifically, this whole thing where he used to sneak food to his dad because his dad was pretty much disowned because he was an alcoholic. And things of that nature. Now, he and his mom were never really that close, and she always felt like he didn't fully appreciate her or really hug her back and that kind of thing. And he wasn't particularly affectionate to her. Sorry. Things like that. So we start learning more about that. When the two characters that come in that came from Katrina, the ones that have lost everything, and then they come to live in the farm, because he has all this space, so he just rents it out to kind of help him, because all of those legal deals and stuff that he's trying to deal with are really taking a toll on his finances. So he has them move in because he's got this huge farmhouse. And they end up, one of them is a history buff. She's a women's studies major. She's really interested in stuff like that. So she starts going through this massive pile of stuff he has, and that unfolds a whole different story. The fact that Wally Lamb can write so many different characters in such an honest and fully realized way is amazing. Because Caleb understandably, that's the character you're with the whole book. So that makes sense for that character to be fully realized and everything. But then there's characters like his great grandmother and his grandmother and his mother and his aunt that are talked about like throughout the book in different places. But then there's an entire section where you learn all this like really deep rooted history of his family. And the characters are so fully developed that they feel like they're part of that. And then it's just crazy that it's the same writer made this person. Like, that's all I kept thinking at one point. There's, when you're getting kind of closer to mid to the end of the book, there's this entire thing where you're reading these old letters and stuff like that. And in those parts, like, I just felt like it has to be a different writer that wrote this. It can't be the same person. But it's all Wally. And I think that speaks volumes to like how well he is, how well of a writer, how wonderful of a writer he is. I thought like all the historical aspects were really fascinating and interesting. I really did like learning more about the women's correctional stuff and the prison background. I thought that was kind of interesting. There's so much though. There's so much more than even what I'm saying. There's so many things in this, and it literally, I mean, it deals with PTSD, it deals with substance abuse, it deals with alcohol abuse, it deals with sexual abuse, it deals with physical abuse, it deals with self-mutilation and coming out of the closet, and oh my god, infidelity, and Katrina, and 9/11, and Iraq War, and the Civil War, and segregation, and suffragettes, and women's rights, and Columbine, and horrible parenting, just in like a lot of different places, and it's so much, and it's so much good. It's a really difficult read, I will definitely say that, and not like that it's wordy or anything, because it's not. It's a really easy read as far as like the language used and stuff, but it is a really difficult read, and because it's so much emotion and so many things thrown at you, and it's kind of Wally Lamb's thing. However, it's been so long since I read a Wally Lamb book, it like totally, it did totally enveloped me, and I got so into it at one point that I had trouble really like stopping reading. I kept saying like, I'll read, it was that just one more chapter thing, just one more chapter and I'll do this, and then I'd read like another 50 pages and be like, no, how about like 6 more chapters? I had the same thing with Dark Shade of Magic. I've been really like getting lost in books lately, which is a good thing. It means I read them pretty fast. So yeah, so it's just, I gave it 5 stars because it was just such a good book. Again, it's really hard to read. If you're not attuned to reading really emotional books, don't read it. I would say no. If you are, then obviously do it. If you're big on history too, I think it's a really cool book to read, because a lot of the historical things in it are accurate. He has an author's note in the back which says like, though this stuff is fictionalized, this did happen here, or if you want to look into more of this stuff, you can do this. And a lot of the things, like the other characters he has that are kind of like thrown in, that are weaved through his ancestry story, Caleb's ancestry story, or like your, Abraham Lincoln, Louisa May Alcott, things like that. So that's really interesting in its own right, just kind of having those characters all of a sudden be in there. Dorothea Dix is in there, stuff like that. It was just a really well done portrait of how one person can live through so many different tragic events, and how they can develop throughout that like those kind of things kind of shape a person, because it's Caleb was abandoned as a child. Caleb was brought up in an interesting environment. Caleb had a different kind of parenting given to him. Caleb had an alcoholic father. Caleb had a wife who was and he was married 3 times in this. He's been married more than once. There's infidelity, there's trust issues, there's an entire like thing where they're separated based on like religion and stuff, because he's not really religious and she is, and it's just so many things, and then so many things happen just based on the tragedies that happen and he lives through, and there's so much more. I don't want to give away everything, because I think that you really need to. I'm like, literally all the stuff I've told you that is even spoilery, that's only like half the book. I mean, like, there's so much more. There's like too much to even talk about, if that's possible. Um, I was gonna say, oh, I did really think there's a story, and it happens near the end of the book that shocked the crap out of me. I literally was just, I am in shock right now. What is happening? And that was probably the biggest, I don't know, turn it took, I guess the way to put it. Like, it just, out of left field, really didn't expect it. Didn't expect it at all. I'm like, worse than the vehicular manslaughter part where I was like, oh my god, the kid's gonna, what? Worse than, you know, the prison aspect, like, and him being by himself, and that kind of stuff. Worse than all of that, there's one thing where you're about 3/4 into the book and this thing happens, and I just, like, I had the book in my hand, and it was one of those, like, had the book not been so big where you would, like, throw the book. Like, what just happened? And I think being able to have, like, a, you know, almost 800 page, well, 730 page book, and it have those kind of twists in there that, like, when you're, you know, page 700 thinking, oh, book's almost over, and all of a sudden you get some other, you know, whiplash kind of moment. It's pretty cool. It's pretty, it just, it's all in how good it's written, I guess. But yeah, like I said, I gave it 5 stars. I really like it. I definitely need to read more of his books. I really do like his books. They're like a real undertaking. I feel like his books are an undertaking for emotional reasons. And like Gregory Maguire, who wrote like Wicked, his books are an undertaking because of how much language is there. like it's a different kind of thing. Like that's just, that feels like your brain is being, Gregory Maguire, like the your brain may break from reading so much language, whereas Wally and Lamb, I feel like it's your heart's breaking the whole time because it's so much emotion. I keep bouncing the camera, I'm sorry. Yeah, so 5 stars, really liked it. How I First Believed. That's the second book for the year, so I'm 2 out of 100. That's something. I just joined another, stop bouncing. I just joined another Goodreads group because I needed another one. I have so many, but I keep joining them based on like what they're doing for reading challenges this year. Because I had gone into it thinking I wasn't going to do a bunch of reading challenges because I got kind of bored doing them last year, and then I kind of just read whatever. But I like it to a point. I like that it kind of forces me to pull things off my shelf maybe I wouldn't have grabbed, or focus on something different than just, I have this huge pile of books and I'm going to read through it like I do over here. Giant pile of books. So rather than that, like, giving me kind of an inspiration, I guess. It's why I like when there are themed readathons too, like hashtag Yearathon does themed readathons, and I like that because it's kind of, okay, I'll grab that book to read. Yeah, so I joined another one. It's around the year in 52 books. I think that's what it's called. It's kind of interesting. Every week, because they're trying to read a book a week for the year, they have a different kind of theme for what kind of book you're supposed to grab. So I'm kind of interested about it. I've done one. The one that I did actually worked for that. This worked for also the other reading challenge that I had said in my 2016 that I'm doing as part of one of my book clubs that I'm in, and just in general, it was passed around Facebook 1,000 times, and then one of the Facebook groups I'm in is an alumni group that's a book club for the college that I went to. So it, so I joined up with it there. I was like, oh, I'll definitely do it now. So it worked for one of those, which was the book I've been meaning to read is what I used it for. And then I used it for the other one, which was a book I was going to read in 2015. So I was like, yep, I definitely was. I even started it then. So yeah. So it worked for both of those. So I got 2 little challenges down. I think I mentioned I was in the Serious Reader Challenge, because that one you have to commit to reading 100 books in the year. And then if you hit 100 books, then it gives you like another challenge. And I really want to like hit 100 books just to see what the next level is. I'm really curious. But some people have already read. I was looking at it, like, they're on like their 30th book already, and then I looked it up and they're reading like 30-page books, and I'm like, cheater! Like, I'm reading a giant 700-page book here. Anyway, so yeah, that was the hour I First Believed. This is a massively long review, but it's a massively long book, and I feel like it needed it, and I just really liked it, and I needed to talk about it because no one else has read it. Even the friend that gave it to me, I found out after, she hadn't read it, so I thought that she had read it, and we were talking about it, and she's talking about it with me, and then I said something about, something that happens at the end of the book, and she was just like, what are you talking about? And then I was like, why are you even talking to me about this then? I ruined the book. I was like, I did not mean to spoil you. I'm so sorry. I hate spoiling people. So that's why I told you had to leave the video if you didn't want to be spoiled, because I don't know how to talk about the book without spoiling. There's so many things. But I had to talk it out. I feel like I really did. It's such a good book. It really is. And when I closed it last night, when I finished it, I was just like, it was so good. It was so good. It's so hard and so emotional and so raw and so honest and so developed and so lovely. And I just really liked it. I would never read it again. Honestly, I don't think I could. I don't think I want to put myself through that again. But it is one of those books I'm glad I read. Yeah, so if you liked the video, please hit like. If you would like to see more, subscribe. I hope that I will see you very soon with book number 3 for the year. Yay! I am participating in a readathon. Another one of my groups. It's Hooked on Books. That's what it's called. Hooked on Books. January 30th. They're having a 24-hour readathon. I'm pretty excited about that. And right now, looking at my schedule, it looks like I will not be working that day, so that would work out. Yeah. I think that's it. I think that's all I've got. I think that's enough, right? I will see you soon with another video, and I hope it's for my 3rd book of the year, which would be awesome. I'm looking over there, and I have some right there. There's one I have to read because it's a library book, but I really want to read 2 other books instead, but I have to read that one. I need to, because it has to go back soon. Have a lovely evening, and enjoy yourself with a book. No. Happy reading to you. I'll see you in the next one.